Ex who left me for my little sis wants me back. Turns out she's cheating on him. So, yeah, I guess you could say my life was a bit of a mess from the start. I didn't have that perfect family everyone dreams of. My dad, Benny, wasn't really around much. He used to fight with my mom constantly, and then he'd just disappear for months. Sometimes, I didn't even know if he was alive. But honestly, I kind of got used to it. It was what it was, you know? I was maybe like 8 or 9 when I realized he wasn't coming back for good. He died when my sister Lisa was born, which just made my mom baby her even more. I don't mean my mom neglected me or anything like that. She did her best. I had food, a roof over my head, clothes to wear, but emotionally, I always felt like something was missing. My mom gave all her attention to Lisa. Every little thing she did was amazing, and it felt like I was just there. But, whatever. I didn't let it get to me too much. I was used to feeling second best. That all changed when I met Mark. I was celebrating my 18th birthday with a couple of friends at this restaurant downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small spot we'd go to every now and then. That's when I saw him. Mark. He was 40, older than me by quite a bit, but he didn't look it. He was charming, mature, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. I was just this awkward teen, but he made me feel important. Looking back now, it's pretty embarrassing how quickly I fell for it. He'd always compliment me, buy me little gifts, and take me on long drives. I felt like I mattered for once, like someone finally saw me. I thought he was everything I'd been missing. We started dating, and honestly, things moved fast. Too fast, probably. But at that time, I didn't care. I was just happy to be with someone who made me feel loved. 4 years later, we got married. I was 22 and ready to start a family. I really wanted kids, but Mark had different ideas. He kept saying we should wait, that we needed to be more stable financially. He encouraged me to go back to school, even helped me get into a master's program. At first, I thought he was being supportive, like he wanted me to succeed. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe he just wanted me distracted. Anyway, I did the whole school thing, but deep down, I still wanted to be a mom. We talked about it off and on, but there was always an excuse: money, work, timing. I thought he was just being practical, you know? But I'd soon find out he had other reasons for stalling. About 5 years into our marriage, I noticed things started to change. Mark was still sweet, but there was this distance. He wasn't around as much. He'd go on these business trips for days at a time. At first, I didn't question it. I trusted him, or at least I thought I did. But then, there were small things that didn't add up, little lies here and there. One day he'd say he was in Boston, but then I'd find out he was still in town. I ignored it because, honestly, I didn't want to believe what was going on. But it all came crashing down when I found out the truth. One night, he told me he had to leave for a work trip again, this time for a whole week. I didn't think much of it, but something in my gut told me to check. I don't know why. I didn't normally do stuff like that, but this time, I just had a feeling. So I looked up his credit card transactions. I know, kind of snoopy, but at that point, I needed to know. There it was. He hadn't left town. In fact, he booked a hotel room just a few miles away from where we lived. I felt like I got punched in the gut. My hands were shaking and I couldn't think straight. I drove down to that hotel, hoping, praying that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't what I thought. Maybe there was some explanation, something innocent. But when I got there, I saw his car parked outside. I went inside, marched straight to the front desk, and told them I was his wife. The lady behind the counter gave me a look like she knew exactly what was going on, but didn't want to say anything. She told me his room number, and I went up, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I stood outside the door for what felt like forever, trying to decide if I even wanted to go through with it. When I finally knocked, Lisa opened the door. I can't even explain what that felt like. It was like everything around me just disappeared. My own sister. The one person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. I'd always been there for her, always took care of her when our mom was too busy spoiling her. And now she was sleeping with my husband. Mark was sitting on the bed behind her, looking at me like I was the intruder. I didn't even know what to say. I just stood there, staring at them, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. I asked him how long it had been going on. He didn't even try to lie. 6 months. For 6 months, the man I was married to and the sister I thought loved me were sneaking around behind my back. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to do something, but all I could do was stand there in shock. I finally asked him why. Why would he do this to me? And you know what he said? He said he didn't love me anymore, that I wasn't the same girl he fell in love with, that I wasn't giving him enough attention. Can you believe that? He had the audacity to make it my fault. I don't even know where to start with what happened next. Honestly, after everything blew up, it felt like I was stuck in some twisted reality. Everything that I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, all of it was shattered. And I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces, even though I didn't really know how to do that. Mark and I had this massive fight after I found out about him and Lisa. And when I say massive, I mean it was ugly. There was yelling, crying, and accusations being thrown all over the place. He tried to defend himself at first, saying things like, "It just happened," and "I didn't mean to hurt you," which is total bull because how do you accidentally sleep with someone for 6 months? That's not a mistake, that's a choice. But the worst part was when he started blaming me for it, saying I wasn't paying enough attention to him. Like, what? That's his excuse for betraying me? He basically said that because I was too focused on my career and not on him, he had no choice but to find someone else to give him attention. It was such a slap in the face. I mean, I worked my butt off to get my master's degree because he told me that's what we should do. Focus on our future, make sure we're stable before having kids. But now he was turning that around on me, making it seem like I was the bad guy for doing what he wanted in the first place. So, we had that fight, and I told him I wanted a divorce. He didn't even try to fight it. He just shrugged and said, "If that's what you want." Like it didn't matter at all. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by his reaction, but it still hurt. After everything we'd been through, I thought he'd at least try to fix things. But no, he just gave up on us, on me, like it was no big deal. I didn't know what to do next. My whole world was falling apart, and I was just numb. I wasn't sure where to go or who to turn to. My mom wasn't any help. She made it clear that she was siding with Lisa, telling me that I should forgive and forget because family is family. Yeah, no thanks. I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want anything to do with either of them at that point. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, I found out I was pregnant. I didn't even know how to process that. I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that my husband had been cheating on me with my sister, and now I was pregnant? It felt like some sick joke. Part of me thought maybe the baby could change things. Maybe Mark would realize how badly he'd messed up, but deep down I knew it wouldn't fix anything. The stress from everything was unbearable. I tried to focus on taking care of myself, but it didn't matter. I lost the baby. I was completely crushed. That was supposed to be the one good thing in all this mess, and it was ripped away from me too. And where was Mark when this happened? Off with Lisa, of course. He didn't even come to the hospital to check on me. I was all alone, dealing with the worst pain I'd ever felt, both physically and emotionally, and he couldn't even bother to show up. After that, I knew I couldn't stay. There was nothing left for me here. The person I thought I'd spend my life with had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and my own family had turned their backs on me. I had to get out. That's when Karen stepped in, my best friend, my ride or die. She was moving to another state and asked if I wanted to come with her. I didn't even hesitate. I was already divorced at that point, and there was nothing keeping me in that town anymore. I packed up what little I had left, signed the final divorce papers, and left. Starting over was harder than I thought. Moving to a new state was supposed to be a fresh start, but the first few months were brutal. I didn't know anyone except Karen, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that had been weighing me down. I didn't trust anyone. I barely even trusted myself. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting Mark or Lisa to pop up and ruin my life even more. I know it sounds paranoid, but after everything that happened, I was scared. Karen did her best to help me get settled, though. She's the kind of friend who never gives up on you, no matter how many times you fall apart. She dragged me out of the house when I didn't want to go anywhere, forced me to meet new people, and slowly but surely, I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could have a life again. It wasn't easy, though. Trusting people again was probably the hardest part. I'd be talking to someone, trying to make new friends. But in the back of my mind, I'd always be wondering, what's their angle? Are they going to stab me in the back like everyone else did? It's exhausting living like that. But after being hurt so badly, it's like you can't help it. You're always on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, just when I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again, I met Eric. It wasn't love at first sight or anything like that. To be honest, I didn't even want to date at first. I had this wall up, and I wasn't about to let anyone tear it down. But Eric was different. He didn't push. He didn't try to force his way into my life. He just waited. He'd show up with coffee when I was having a bad day, sit with me when I didn't feel like talking, and he never made me feel like I had to pretend to be okay when I wasn't. He let me heal on my own time, and that meant more to me than anything else. We took things slow, which was exactly what I needed. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. He made me feel safe, like I didn't have to keep my guard up 24/7. It wasn't long before I realized that what we had was something real, something that could last. About a year after I moved to the new state, Eric and I got married. It wasn't a big wedding or anything fancy, but it was perfect for us. His family welcomed me with open arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real family. A family that actually cared about me. And now, we're expecting our first child, and I couldn't be happier. Update 1. So, there I was, finally feeling like my life was on track. I had a great husband, a baby on the way, and for once, I felt happy. I was starting to believe that maybe I could leave the past behind. But life doesn't always work like that, right? Just when things were going smoothly, I got that email from Mark. To be honest, I didn't even want to open it. The second I saw his name pop up in my inbox, my stomach dropped. It had been 6 years since we split, and I hadn't heard a single word from him. I figured he was living his life with Lisa and whatever mess they'd made for themselves. I didn't care. But curiosity got the best of me, and I opened the email. Mark wrote like nothing had happened between us, like we hadn't gone through the messiest breakup of my life. He started by saying he missed me, that he'd been thinking about me a lot lately. I rolled my eyes so hard I swear I almost saw my brain. I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. He said he'd tried to find me but hadn't had any luck, probably because I made sure I disappeared from that whole town when I left. Then it got even weirder. He started talking about Lisa. Apparently things weren't going so great for them. He mentioned that she didn't care about him the way I did, that she didn't even bother celebrating his birthday. I had to laugh at that. Like, what did he expect? He thought she'd be the perfect replacement for me, and now he was complaining because she didn't bake him a cake or something? Give me a break. Mark went on to say that Lisa had been cheating on him, 5 times to be exact. The most recent one? With his own cousin Jack. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I mean, I didn't feel sorry for him, not one bit, but still. His cousin? That's messed up even by Lisa's standards. I couldn't help but laugh again. Like, did he really think this email was going to make me feel sorry for him after everything he put me through? He didn't stop there, though. He said he was miserable and that he was thinking about divorcing her. He even had the nerve to say he wanted to get back together with me, that he missed how we used to be and thought maybe we could start over, become a family again. Like, what? Did he forget why we ended in the first place? He was acting like none of that mattered, like I'd just forgive him and everything would go back to the way it was. At this point, I was furious. I couldn't believe the audacity. After everything he did, cheating on me with my own sister, abandoning me when I needed him the most, he had the nerve to ask me to take him back. It was like he didn't even understand what he'd done to me, or worse, maybe he just didn't care. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, staring at my phone, thinking about all the ways I could tell him to screw off. Part of me wanted to just block him and move on, but another part of me, I don't know. I wanted him to know just how much he'd messed up. I wanted to say something that would hit him where it hurt, to make sure he knew there was no chance in hell I'd ever take him back. But then I realized, why should I waste any more energy on him? He didn't deserve my time, my thoughts, nothing. He was just trying to get a reaction out of me, trying to see if he still had some kind of control over my life. And you know what? I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. That's when I decided to write him back. But not with the angry rant I'd originally planned. Instead, I kept it short and to the point. I told him I was sorry that he was miserable, but that he had made his choice when he chose Lisa over me. I let him know that I was now happily married to someone who actually loved and respected me, and we were expecting our first child. I ended the email by telling him never to contact me again. I hit send, and that was it. It felt freeing in a way, like I was finally closing the door on that part of my life for good. I didn't need to explain myself to him anymore. He was part of my past, and that's where he was going to stay. A few hours later, he replied, I didn't want to read it, but curiosity got the best of me again. He said something about being stupid for thinking I'd wait for him and that no matter what, I'd always be his baby doll. Ugh, that nickname used to make me feel special. But now, it made me want to throw up. The way he wrote it, like he still thought he had some kind of claim on me, it was disgusting. That was the final straw. I blocked him after that and decided I wasn't going to give him any more space in my life. But it didn't stop there. A day or two later, I got an email from my mom and Lisa. Apparently, Mark had told them about my pregnancy, and they were both acting like nothing had ever happened. My mom was excited about becoming a grandmother, and Lisa? She actually had the nerve to say she couldn't wait to be the cool aunt. I couldn't believe it. These were the same people who turned their backs on me when I needed them most. The same people who betrayed me and took Mark's side when everything went down. Now they wanted to act like we were one big happy family. I was livid. I didn't respond to them. I didn't even bother. I just blocked them too. I didn't need their fake congratulations or their empty apologies. They weren't part of my life anymore, and they never would be. Eric was there through all of this. He held me when I cried, comforted me when I felt like I couldn't handle it, and reminded me that I had a new family now, a family that loved me for who I was and didn't try to tear me down. He's been my rock through all of this, and I don't know what I'd do without him. So yeah, that's where things stand now. Mark, Lisa, my mom, they're all out of my life for good, and I'm finally okay with that. I've got Eric, our baby on the way, and a future that looks brighter than it ever did before. They can keep their drama. I'm done with all of it. Update 2. After blocking Mark, Lisa, and my mom, I thought that would be the end of it. I mean, how many times can someone come back into your life and cause chaos before they just give up? I'd already moved on, found peace, and was building a future with Eric. But of course, life wasn't done throwing surprises my way. A couple of weeks after I sent that final email, I was just going about my day, trying to enjoy the calm for once. Eric had gone to work, and I was home, sorting out baby stuff. We were getting closer to my due date, so I was all about organizing the nursery, folding baby clothes, and planning how we were going to handle everything once our little one arrived. Then my phone buzzed. I figured it was one of those spam messages or some random notification, but when I picked it up and saw the name on the screen, I swear I nearly dropped the phone. It was Lisa. I hadn't spoken to her since I blocked her, so for her to pop up now made no sense. The only reason her message even came through was because she sent it from a new number. Honestly, part of me didn't even want to read it. I was done with her drama. But against my better judgment, I opened it. Lisa was saying that she needed to talk to me, that it was urgent and about the family. She didn't give any details, just kept begging me to call her back. I sat there for a good 5 minutes, debating whether I should just delete the message and pretend I never saw it. But something about the way she said it was urgent got to me. Like, was someone sick or something? My mom wasn't exactly young, and I hadn't heard anything about her in a while. I thought, fine, I'll just call her and get it over with. So I dialed the number. As soon as she picked up, Lisa launched into this whole sob story about how her life was falling apart. She sounded like she was crying, and at first I was too shocked to really say anything. She just kept going on and on about how she and Mark were splitting up, how he'd filed for divorce, and that he had been telling everyone that she was to blame for everything that went wrong. She said she felt like the whole world was against her, and she didn't know what to do. Now, here's where it got weird. She wasn't calling to apologize or even acknowledge what she did to me. No, she wanted me to help her. She was asking if I could talk to Mark, maybe smooth things over with him because, apparently, he still respected me, and she thought maybe I could convince him not to go through with the divorce. Can you believe that? I couldn't even process what she was saying. After everything she did to me, after betraying me in the worst way possible, she had the nerve to ask for my help in saving her marriage. It was like she completely forgot about how she destroyed mine. I couldn't hold back anymore. I cut her off mid-sentence and just let it all out. I told her exactly what I thought, how she was insane to think I'd help her, how I didn't care about what happened between her and Mark, and how she deserved every bit of misery she was going through. I reminded her of everything she'd done to me, how she'd wrecked my life, and how, frankly, I didn't give a damn about hers anymore. It was one of those moments where you just get it all off your chest and you don't even care about the consequences. It felt good to finally say it. I wasn't going to pretend to care about her problems, not after everything she'd done. Lisa tried to cut in, crying, saying she made a mistake, that she wasn't thinking straight back then. But it was too late for that. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. I told her straight up that she needed to deal with her own mess and leave me out of it. And before she could say anything else, I hung up and blocked her number again. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. A few days later, I get another message, this time from my mom. Apparently, Lisa had run crying to her after our conversation, and now my mom was trying to guilt trip me. She started going on about how family sticks together, and how Lisa was really struggling right now and needed support. I couldn't believe it. My mom had always been on Lisa's side no matter what, but I thought maybe this time she'd realize how messed up things were. Nope, she went right back to defending Lisa, acting like I was the one who needed to reach out and make things right. I sent her a pretty blunt reply. I told her I wasn't interested in hearing any more about Lisa or Mark, that I'd moved on, and she should too. I reminded her how she'd taken Lisa's side all those years ago and that she had no right to tell me how I should feel or who I should support. I told her I wasn't going to be part of their lives anymore and that if she couldn't accept that, then it was her problem, not mine. After that, I blocked her too. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their drama. I had my own life now, a new family that actually cared about me, and I wasn't about to risk that for people who only wanted me around when they needed something. And honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. The second I cut them off, I felt this weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't realize how much their negativity had been dragging me down until I was finally free from it. Eric noticed the change in me too. He told me I seemed lighter, happier. I guess I hadn't even realized how much I'd been holding on to until I finally let it go. It's funny how people who claim to be your family can be the ones who cause the most pain. But when you find the right people, the ones who truly love you, it makes all the difference. So that's where I'm at now. My focus is on my baby, my husband, and building a life that's full of love and peace, not drama. I don't need the chaos of my past anymore. I'm done with all of it. Sure, sometimes I wonder if they'll ever change, if they'll ever realize the damage they did. But honestly, it doesn't really matter to me anymore. They can keep living their lives the way they want, but I won't be a part of it. Not now. Not ever. Update 3. I'd like to say that after cutting off Lisa and my mom, everything just magically fell into place, and life was smooth sailing from there. But things are never that simple, right? Even when you think you've left the past behind, it sometimes finds a way of creeping back in. It was about 2 months after that whole mess with Lisa when the final straw came. I was at home, folding some baby clothes, thinking about how soon our little one would be here. I'd been feeling good. Really good, actually. Eric and I were in such a solid place, and everything felt right for the first time in years. Then, out of nowhere, I get a call from an unknown number. I didn't think much of it at first. I'd been getting a lot of spam calls lately, so I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Maybe it was the pregnancy paranoia, or maybe it was just curiosity. I don't know. Either way, I answered. Hey, Jenna, it's Mark. I froze. I literally had no words. My brain was trying to process what was happening. How did he even get my number? I had blocked him from everything, hadn't spoken to him since that ridiculous email he sent me about wanting to get back together, and now here he was, casually calling me like we were old friends. Before I could even ask how he got my number, he jumped into this long rant about how everything was falling apart in his life. He said Lisa had moved out, filed for divorce, and had taken everything, including the car that he'd bought with our money back when we were married. He kept saying how unfair it was, how he didn't deserve this, and how he was completely alone. I didn't say a word. I just let him talk. And the more he talked, the more pathetic he sounded. It was like he didn't even realize how all of this was his own doing. He acted like he was the victim, like everything bad that was happening to him was some kind of cosmic punishment. Not once did he apologize for what he did to me, for how he treated me, or even acknowledge the fact that this whole mess started because he cheated on me with my sister. When he finally stopped talking, there was this long silence. I think he was waiting for me to say something, maybe comfort him or tell him it would all be okay. But I had nothing to say to him. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything. I was just done. So I simply said, Mark, you made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Don't call me again. And I hung up. I sat there for a minute, staring at my phone, just trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. It wasn't even about Mark at that point. It was the fact that, after everything he'd put me through, he still thought he had the right to reach out to me, to ask for help, to expect anything from me. I wasn't upset, though. I actually felt a sense of relief. That call was like the final chapter closing on everything I'd been through with him. I didn't need closure from Mark, and I definitely didn't need to help him fix his life. He wasn't my problem anymore, and that felt amazing. After that, things really did settle down. I blocked his number, of course, just to be sure he couldn't try contacting me again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't have to worry about my past creeping back into my life. Eric and I continued preparing for the baby, and life was peaceful. It was almost surreal how quiet things had gotten after years of dealing with family drama and betrayal. It's like I was finally free to just live my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. When our baby girl finally arrived, it was like everything clicked into place. Holding her for the first time, I felt this overwhelming sense of love and protectiveness. It made me realize even more how important it was to keep toxic people out of my life. I wanted to give her the kind of family that was full of love and support, not the kind of chaos and betrayal that I had grown up with. Eric was the perfect partner through it all. He was there for every moment, Every late night feeding, every diaper change, every breakdown when I felt overwhelmed. And every time I looked at him, I was reminded of how lucky I was to have found someone who truly cared about me. Someone who didn't just talk about love, but actually showed it every day in the way he treated me and our daughter. The best part? Eric's family embraced me like I was one of their own. His mom was constantly checking in on us, bringing over food, offering to help with the baby, and his dad was just as amazing. It was like I'd finally found the family I always wanted but never had. It wasn't just about blood, it was about the people who choose to show up for you, who actually care. And that's when I realized family isn't just the people you're born into, it's the people who stick by you, who support you, who love you no matter what. The ones who show up when you need them and don't disappear when things get hard. I might have lost my family along the way, but I gained something so much better. As for Mark and Lisa, I haven't heard from either of them since that last call. Part of me wonders what they're up to, if they finally managed to sort out their own mess. But honestly, it doesn't matter. They're not part of my life anymore, and I'm okay with that. I don't need them, and I don't miss them. What I have now, Eric, our daughter, and the life we're building together, that's all that matters. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. And for the first time in a long time, I'm truly happy. So yeah, that's my story. I guess if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away from the people who hurt you, no matter how hard it is. It's not about holding grudges or being bitter. It's about choosing yourself, choosing happiness, and not letting anyone take that away from you. And for anyone who's going through something similar, I'll say this. Don't be afraid to cut out the people who don't deserve a place in your life. You deserve better. You deserve love, respect, and peace. Don't settle for anything less. Stepdaughter called me a gold digger, but her dad's broke. I'm the one paying for her wedding. All right, so let me break this down for you. I, 38F, have been married to my husband, Rick, 52M, for about 4 years now. His late wife passed away about a year before we met, and we dated for 2 years before we tied the knot. So, yeah, not a super long time, but long enough to know what I signed up for. Rick's got 2 kids from his first marriage, Jess, 28F, and Blake, 26M. Now, just to clear things up, I don't call them my stepkids, because they made it real clear from day one that I wasn't their stepmom, just their dad's new wife. Fine by me, honestly. It's not like I was trying to replace their mom or anything. They're adults. They don't need a new parent. But let me tell you, things have never been easy between us. From the beginning, it was just cold. Like, no matter what I did, there was this wall between us. I tried to be polite, tried to be generous when I could, but it's like they already decided they didn't like me before I even got a chance. I get it, kind of. I went through my parents' divorce as a kid, and I remember feeling weird when my dad started seeing someone new. But this felt different. It's like they saw me as some outsider trying to take something from them. Not that I ever was, but that's how they acted. Anyway, we mostly kept things civil, though. I wasn't going to force anything, and neither were they. We all just kind of existed in this weird space where we acknowledged each other, but never really bonded. It was like living with roommates who didn't really talk to you, but you had to pretend everything was fine for the sake of the person in the middle, Rick. So fast forward a bit, and Jess gets engaged. Rick and I were excited for her, or at least I was trying to be. It's kind of hard to be genuinely pumped for someone who clearly doesn't like you, but I was doing my best. I figured this might be a chance for all of us to get a little closer. Maybe, I don't know, find some common ground in all the wedding stuff. I was wrong. So wrong. A few weeks after Jess's engagement, she and Blake came over to our house. Nothing fancy, just a casual visit. We're all sitting in the living room chatting about our wedding plans, and then it happens. The money talk. It always happens, doesn't it? Rick had been pretty quiet during most of the conversation, but when Jess asked about what he could contribute, he perked up a bit. He told her that he could put in about $10,000 towards the wedding. Now, to me, that sounded pretty damn generous, considering everything. But Jess's face? Oh man, it was like someone had told her she was getting socks for Christmas. Total disappointment. She didn't say anything right away, but you could see the gears turning in her head. I didn't say anything either, because, well, I didn't want to make things worse. Blake just sat there like a statue, not getting involved as usual. Classic Blake. Jess finally spoke up, asking, "Is that it? I was hoping for a bit more." Rick kind of looked uncomfortable, but he stayed calm and explained, "Jess, I'd love to give you more, but that's what I can manage right now." I should probably explain why $10K is already more than enough. See, before Rick's wife passed, they went through hell with medical bills. Cancer treatments, hospital stays, and everything else drained every penny they had. Rick had to cash out his retirement, sell some investments, and even take out a second mortgage on his house just to cover it all. He basically sacrificed his entire financial future to take care of his wife in her final years. And after she passed, it left him in a tough spot. Not to mention, he quit his higher-paying job for something that gave him more flexibility. But it didn't pay nearly as much. So that $10K, yeah, that's a pretty big deal. Anyway, after Rick explains himself, Jess doesn't look any happier. She presses him a bit more, but he stands firm. $10K is what he can give, and that's it. She sighs, clearly not happy. And then Rick says he's going to run out for a bit to grab something from the store. So it's just me, Jess, and Blake sitting in awkward silence. That's when Jess turns to me and says, "So, are you going to pitch in any more for the wedding? I mean, you're married to my dad now, right?" The way she said it, I can't even explain it. It wasn't just a question. It was like she was daring me to say no. Like she already had some nasty assumption about me and was waiting for confirmation. I didn't want to get into a whole thing with her, so I just told her, "Rick and I talked about it, and $10K is what we agreed on. That's what we can give together." Jess rolled her eyes and said, "I should have known. You're just here for what he has, not what you can give." I can't even begin to describe how pissed off that made me. Like, seriously? I've been putting up with her coldness for years, and now she has the nerve to accuse me of marrying her dad for money? I don't know what came over me, but I snapped. "Excuse me?" I said, trying not to raise my voice. "Who do you think has been paying off that second mortgage your dad took out? Who do you think is keeping this house afloat?" She looked confused for a second, but I wasn't done. "Your dad lost most of his savings taking care of your mom, and ever since we got married, I've been covering 70% of the bills. So no, I'm not a gold digger. I make more than your dad, and I've been the one helping him get back on his feet." Jess didn't even know what to say. She just kind of stared at me, probably trying to figure out if I was serious. Then, without another word, she stands up, calls me stuck up, and storms out of the house. Blake, like usual, stayed quiet, then awkwardly followed her out, not saying a single word. And that was that. Jess left, pissed off, and now I'm sitting here wondering if I went too far. But honestly, what was I supposed to do? Just sit there and let her call me a gold digger? I know things are probably going to get even messier now, but I'm done pretending like I don't exist in this family. If they want to think the worst of me, fine, but they should at least know the truth first. Alright, so here's where things start to get messy. After Jess stormed out and Blake followed her, I was left sitting there in total disbelief. Like, did that really just happen? I knew things weren't exactly warm and fuzzy between me and Rick's kids, but for Jess to straight up accuse me of being with her dad for his money, that was a new low, even for her. I sat there for a few minutes, just replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out if there was something I said or did that could have triggered her to act like that. Spoiler, there wasn't. So Rick gets home not too long after, and of course, the first thing he notices is that Jess and Blake are gone. I wasn't exactly ready to tell him about the whole fight just yet, so I brushed it off with something like, "Oh, they had to go." Rick didn't really push for details, which I was thankful for at that moment because I wasn't ready to get into it right away, but I knew I couldn't keep it from him forever. The next day, I get a text from Jess. It was one of those passive-aggressive, "I need to talk to my dad without you around" type messages, and honestly, it took everything in me not to respond with some smart comment. Instead, I told Rick that Jess wanted to talk to him, and he, being the good dad that he is, said he'd reach out and see what's going on. Later that evening, Rick gives her a call, and I'm just sitting in the other room pretending not to listen while also absolutely listening to every word. I couldn't hear what Jess was saying on her end, but from Rick's responses, I could tell she was definitely twisting the story. At one point, Rick says, "She said what?" And I could feel my stomach drop. Jess had clearly taken what I said about me helping out financially and twisted it into some wild accusation about me blaming her mom's illness for her not getting a better wedding budget. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that I felt like my head was about to explode from frustration. Rick hung up the phone, and I knew I had to come clean about the fight before Jess's version of events took over. So I sit him down and walk him through exactly what happened, how Jess accused me of being a gold digger, how I lost my temper and told her the truth about who's really been paying the bills, and how she stormed out after calling me stuck up. To my surprise, Rick wasn't mad. Well, not at me at least. He was pissed at Jess for what she said and how she handled the whole thing, But I could tell he was also uncomfortable with the fact that I had shared details about his financial situation with his kids. And I get it, I really do. I probably shouldn't have said anything in the heat of the moment, but what was I supposed to do? Just let her keep throwing those nasty accusations at me? Rick, being the calm and level-headed guy he is, said he'd talked to Jess and Blake, but he also gently told me that he didn't want his kids knowing all the details about his finances. He's always been pretty private about money, and I can respect that. But at the same time, I felt like they needed to know the truth, especially if they were going to sit there and act like I'm just mooching off their dad. Anyway, a few days go by, and I don't hear anything from Jess or Blake. It was kind of a relief, to be honest. The tension in the house had been sky high since the whole argument, and I was just trying to get back to some sense of normalcy. Rick and I went about our routine and things were fine between us, but I could tell he was still bothered by the situation with his kids. He wasn't saying much about it, but I could see it weighing on him. And of course, I felt guilty for putting him in that position, even though I knew I was only defending myself. Then, one afternoon, Rick gets another call from Jess. This time, she doesn't even wait for him to reach out first. She just calls out of nowhere. Again, I'm sitting in the other room, pretending not to listen while very much listening. And once again, I hear Rick saying stuff like, "That's not what she said," and "You need to stop twisting things." After the call, Rick came to me, clearly frustrated. Apparently, Jess had convinced herself that I somehow blamed her mom's illness for the fact that her wedding budget wasn't bigger. It's like she took one part of what I said, about how Rick had drained his savings during her mom's illness, and twisted it into me saying her mom's death was the reason for everything. I mean, who even thinks like that? Rick assured me that he told Jess she was overreacting and that I didn't say anything like that, but he also asked me to be a little more careful with what I say around his kids. He wasn't mad at me, but I could tell he didn't want things to escalate any further. At this point, I was just done. Done with the drama, done with the accusations, and done with trying to make things right with Jess and Blake. If they were going to keep coming at me like this, then I didn't see the point in bending over backward to make them like me. I wasn't the enemy here. I'd been nothing but supportive of Rick, and they were acting like I was some kind of villain in their story. It was exhausting. But of course, things didn't end there. They never do, right? A few days later, Rick comes to me and says that Jess is still upset and that she's now telling people I'm trying to take over the family finances. I swear, it was like every time we thought we were done with this mess, something new would pop up. I wasn't even sure how to react at this point. I mean, how do you respond when someone's just determined to see you as the bad guy, no matter what you do? Rick, to his credit, defended me again. He told Jess that I wasn't trying to take over anything, and that I'd actually been the one helping him rebuild after everything that happened. But I could tell it was starting to wear on him too. No one wants to be stuck in the middle between their wife and their kids, and I felt bad for Rick, but I also didn't know what else to do. At this point, it felt like a lose-lose situation. I wasn't about to back down and let Jess continue thinking I was some gold digger, but I also didn't want to keep putting Rick in this uncomfortable spot. It was like no matter what I did, things were only going to get worse. So yeah, that's where we were. Me, stuck in this weird battle with my husband's kids, trying to navigate this mess without making things worse for Rick. It wasn't exactly what I had imagined when I married him, but here we were. So, after the whole mess with Jess and her ridiculous accusations, I thought things might cool down for a bit, but nope, it got worse. And when I say worse, I mean the kind of worse where you just want to throw your hands up and be like, what did I do to deserve this? But of course, I had to keep my cool, because if I didn't, I'd be the bad guy again. So here's how it goes down. A few days after Rick tells me that Jess is still running her mouth about me, I get a text from Blake. Now, Blake's always been the quieter one between him and Jess, so I wasn't really expecting much from him. But this text? It was long and full of a lot of passive-aggressive nonsense. He basically said something like, "I don't want to get involved, but I think you've been out of line with my sister." Out of line? Really? He didn't even mention the fact that Jess was the one who came at me, calling me a gold digger. Instead, he's just parroting her version of events, saying I should have never brought up money or air their dad's financial struggles. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the wedding budget or me being out of line. This was about control. Jess and Blake had always been used to their dad handling things their way. They'd never had to face the reality of how much Rick had sacrificed for them and their mom. And now that I was in the picture, and the truth was starting to come out, they didn't like it one bit. I was furious, but at the same time, I wasn't surprised. I knew Rick had shielded them from a lot over the years. He never wanted them to feel burdened by his struggles. But come on, at some point, they needed to grow up and face the facts. The world doesn't revolve around them and their wedding plans. So, I showed Rick the text from Blake. I expected him to be upset, maybe even confront Blake about it. But instead, he just sighed and said, "They'll come around." And I just stood there, trying to figure out how he could be so calm about all of this when I was boiling inside. Like, sure, they're his kids, but at what point do you say enough is enough? Rick, being the ever-patient dad, decided he'd talk to them both. He sat down with Jess and Blake separately, trying to explain to them that I wasn't some gold digger, that I was actually the one who had been supporting the household financially, and that they needed to stop making me the bad guy. But instead of owning up to their behavior, Jess doubled down, saying something along the lines of, "It's not about the money, it's about her attitude." Her attitude? Right, because the only thing I ever did wrong was stand up for myself when she insulted me. Blake wasn't any better. He said he didn't want to take sides, but it was clear whose side he was already on. He didn't care about the truth. He just wanted everything to go back to the way it was before I came into the picture. You know, where they had their dad all to themselves and no one was calling them out on their selfishness. After Rick's attempts to smooth things over failed miserably, I decided I was done playing nice. I wasn't going to let them keep dragging my name through the mud without defending myself. So the next time Jess came over, which was, by the way, to talk more about her wedding budget, I sat her down for a real conversation. "Look," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage, "I'm not here to fight with you, but you need to understand something. Your dad gave you $10K because that's what he can afford. He's not some secret millionaire hiding piles of cash. He's been working his butt off to rebuild after everything that happened with your mom." She just crossed her arms and looked at me like I was speaking another language. "I don't care about the money," she said. "I care about how you're treating my dad." That was it. That was the moment I realized Jess wasn't going to listen to a word I said. She wasn't even open to hearing the truth about anything. It was all about her perception, and nothing I said would change that. So I laid it out for her. I told her how I'd been the one paying the majority of the bills since Rick and I got married. How I wasn't some trophy wife living off her dad's money. I wasn't even doing it to make her feel guilty. I just wanted her to understand the reality of the situation. But of course, she didn't. Instead, she got even more defensive, saying, "It's not your place to tell me how my dad's been handling his money." And yeah, maybe she had a point. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. But I was sick of being painted as the villain in this story. When she finally left, I felt like I'd just gone 10 rounds in a boxing match. And to make it worse, Rick wasn't exactly thrilled with how things went down either. He understood where I was coming from, but he still didn't like that I'd confronted Jess so directly. He kept saying things like, "They'll come around eventually." But I wasn't buying it. How many times do you have to let someone disrespect you before you stand up for yourself? The next few days were pretty tense. Rick tried to keep the peace, but it was clear that things were far from okay. Jess and Blake were still talking behind my back, and Rick was still caught in the middle, trying to make everyone happy. It was like we were all just waiting for the next explosion. And then, right when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, Jess called Rick again. This time, she wasn't just upset about the money or my attitude. She'd apparently started telling people that I was trying to take control of Rick's finances, like I had some grand plan to manipulate him and take over his life. It was complete nonsense, but the fact that she was spreading these rumors was enough to make my blood boil. Rick, to his credit, shut it down immediately. He told Jess that what she was saying was completely untrue and that she needed to stop spreading lies, but the damage was already done. Jess had planted this seed of doubt, and now it felt like there was this unspoken tension between Rick and me, even though he said he believed me. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I was tired of defending myself, tired of trying to make peace with people who clearly didn't want anything to do with me. But the worst part? I felt like Rick was starting to get worn down by it all. He wasn't saying it outright, but I could see it in the way he avoided the topic. He didn't want to deal with it anymore, and honestly, neither did I. But something had to give. I just wasn't sure what. Update 1. So, after all the drama with Jess spreading lies and Blake sitting on the sidelines acting like Switzerland, I thought things were as bad as they could get. But of course they weren't. I guess I should have expected it by now. Whenever you think things can't get more complicated, they do. A few days after the last blow-up, Rick comes home looking more stressed than I've ever seen him. He didn't say anything at first, just kind of went about his business like he was trying to figure out how to start. I could tell something was bothering him, so I asked what was going on. Turns out, Jess had taken things up another level. She had gone and told their extended family, Rick's siblings, his parents, even some cousins, that I was trying to take over his finances and basically run his life. She'd spun this whole story about how I was controlling, manipulative, and how Rick wasn't really himself anymore since we got married. I mean, really? At this point, I wasn't even mad anymore. I was just exhausted. How many times can someone throw nonsense at you before it just starts to sound like white noise? But the problem was, it wasn't just noise to Rick's family. They believed her. Rick told me his mom had called him earlier that day, really upset, asking if he was okay and if he needed help. Apparently, she thought I had him trapped or something. And Rick's siblings? They were all blowing up his phone saying things like, "We're worried about you, and why is she involved in your money?" It was ridiculous. None of them had ever even asked about our finances before. But suddenly, they were all experts on how we should be handling things. Rick was frustrated, I could tell. And the worst part? He was frustrated with me, too. Not because I'd actually done anything wrong, but because he felt stuck between his family and me. He didn't want to choose sides, but it was clear that his family was pushing him to. And Jess? She was just sitting back, probably loving the fact that she'd stirred up so much chaos. I told Rick I wasn't going to engage with his family about it. If they wanted to believe Jess's lies, then that was on them. I wasn't about to sit down and explain my entire marriage to them just to clear my name. But Rick? He wasn't so sure. He wanted me to talk to them, to set the record straight. And I get it. I really do. He wanted peace, but I wasn't about to go groveling to his family for their approval, especially not when Jess was the one causing all this mess in the first place. We went back and forth on it for a while. Rick kept saying things like, if they just understood the situation, they wouldn't be upset, and this is all a misunderstanding. But I wasn't buying it. Jess wasn't just misunderstanding things. She was purposely twisting the truth to make me look bad. And Rick's family? They were choosing to believe her without even giving me a chance to explain. Eventually, Rick agreed to leave it alone for now, but I could tell he wasn't happy about it. And honestly, neither was I. It felt like this big cloud hanging over us, just waiting to burst open at the worst possible moment. A couple of days later, Rick had to go out of town for work. Nothing too long, just a weekend trip, but it couldn't have come at a worse time. I was still fuming about the whole family situation, and now I had to deal with it alone while he was away. But whatever, I figured I'd just lay low and hope the weekend passed without any more drama. Of course, that didn't happen. The day Rick left, Jess showed up at the house. I didn't even know she was coming. One minute, I'm minding my own business, and the next, there she is, knocking on the door like she's here for some friendly chat. I opened the door, and she just walked right in like she owned the place. No hello, no nothing. She wasted no time either. The second she sat down, she went right into it. "We need to talk about my dad," she said, like she was about to drop some life-altering news. I just sat there, staring at her, waiting to see what new nonsense she was about to throw at me. She started going on about how Rick had never been the same since we got married, how he used to be more involved in the family before I came along, and how now everything was about me and my needs. And then she dropped the real kicker. "I think you need to step back and let him reconnect with his family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Step back? From what? From my own marriage? It was like she thought I was some kind of invader in her dad's life. And if I just disappeared, everything would magically go back to the way it was before. I didn't lose my temper this time, though. I stayed calm, because I knew that's exactly what she wanted, for me to blow up and give her more ammunition. Instead, I told her, "Look, I'm not going anywhere. Your dad and I are married, and we're a team. If you don't like that, that's your problem, not mine." She didn't like that. At all. Jess stood up and gave me this look like she was about to say something else, but instead she just turned and walked out of the house without another word. And honestly, I was glad she left, because I was about 5 seconds away from losing it. When Rick came back from his trip, I told him what had happened, and he just sighed like he was completely worn down by the whole thing. He didn't even seem surprised anymore, just tired. And to be fair, so was I. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I'd tried everything to keep the peace, to be civil, to give Jess and Blake the space they needed to adjust to our marriage. But it didn't matter. No matter what I did, they were always going to see me as the bad guy. Rick and I had a long talk that night, and I told him how frustrated I was with the whole situation. I wasn't asking him to pick sides, but I needed him to back me up more. I couldn't keep fighting this battle on my own while he stayed neutral. It wasn't fair to either of us, and to his credit, Rick agreed. He told me he was going to have another conversation with Jess, and this time, he wasn't going to hold back. He was going to make it clear that this behavior had to stop, or there were going to be consequences. I didn't know if it would work, but at least it was a start. At least Rick was finally seeing things from my side. Update 2. After that conversation with Rick, I thought things might actually start to change. I really did. I figured maybe, just maybe, he'd talk to Jess, lay down some boundaries, and we could finally get some peace. But of course, things didn't go the way I hoped. They never do they? A couple of days later, Rick sat down with Jess to have the talk. He'd told me he was going to be firm, that he wasn't going to let her walk all over us anymore. And honestly, I believed him. Rick's a good guy, but I knew this whole situation was wearing him down. He'd always tried to stay neutral, but at some point, you've got to take a stand, right? Well, after their talk, Rick came home and told me that things had gone okay. And I'll admit, I wasn't exactly thrilled with the word okay. When I pressed him for more details, he just said Jess seemed to understand that she needed to back off, but she didn't really apologize for anything. I could tell he didn't want to get into it too much, so I let it go, for the moment at least. I figured we'd see how things played out. A week passed, and there was no word from Jess or Blake. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but honestly, the silence was nice for once. It felt like we were finally getting some breathing room. Rick and I even started to have some normal conversations again, without everything being about the kids and their drama. I started to think maybe this was the calm after the storm. But then, Jess called. Now, when I saw her name pop up on Rick's phone, I had that sinking feeling in my stomach like, here we go again. Rick answered, and I could hear Jess's voice on the other end, even though I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Okay, maybe I was a little. She wasn't yelling or anything, but the tone, it wasn't friendly. Rick kept saying things like, we already talked about this, and I thought we were past that, so I knew right away that this wasn't going to be a good conversation. I walked out of the room to give him some space, but I could feel the tension building. When he finally hung up, I asked him what happened, and the look on his face said it all. Apparently, Jess had decided that our last conversation wasn't enough for her. She told Rick that she still felt uncomfortable with me being involved in his finances, and that she wanted to have a meeting with both of us, like a formal sit-down, to discuss it. A meeting? I mean, are we running a business here, or are we just trying to live our lives? Rick looked exhausted, and honestly, so was I. I didn't want to have some kind of intervention with Jess where she'd just twist everything I said and make me out to be the bad guy again. But Rick, being Rick, thought maybe this could be a way to clear the air once and for all. He thought if we could all sit down and talk it out like adults, maybe things would finally get better. I wasn't convinced, but I agreed. What else was I going to do? It's not like we could avoid her forever. So we set up a time to meet at a neutral place, some diner where Rick and I used to go on weekends. I guess the idea was that it wouldn't feel so confrontational if we weren't sitting in our house with all the baggage that comes with it. The day of the meeting rolls around and I'm dreading it. Rick and I get there first, and I can tell he's nervous too. He's tapping his foot under the table, and every time the door opens, he glances over to see if it's Jess. I'm just sitting there trying to mentally prepare for what I know is going to be a train wreck. Jess finally shows up, and to her credit, she's calm. No yelling, no accusations. At least not right away. She sits down and we all order coffee like we're about to have some normal, pleasant conversation. But the second the waitress leaves, Jess dives right into it. I'm still not comfortable with the way things are, she says, not even bothering with any kind of small talk. I don't understand why you're letting her, she gestured at me, have control over everything. I wasn't going to let that slide, so I jumped in. I don't have control over everything, Jess. Your dad and I make decisions together. As a married couple, that's how it works. But she wasn't hearing it. It just feels like you've taken over his life. He used to be so independent, and now it's like he's different. The way she said different made it sound like I'd somehow brainwashed Rick into doing whatever I wanted, which honestly was insane. Rick tried to step in and defend me, but Jess wasn't listening. She kept going on about how things were better before I came into the picture, how Rick was more involved with the family, how she just wanted things to go back to how they were. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about control or finances or any of the stuff she'd been saying. Jess just didn't want me in the picture at all. I sat there trying to stay calm while she unloaded all this on us, but it was getting harder and harder. She wasn't just upset about how things were now. She was blaming me for everything that had changed since her mom passed. She wanted the old version of her dad back, the one who was struggling but still theirs, not the version who had moved on and built a new life with me. I tried to explain that I wasn't trying to replace anyone, that I loved Rick and just wanted to support him. But Jess wasn't having it. She kept pushing, and at one point she even said, maybe you should take a step back and let Dad figure things out on his own for a while. That was it. That was my breaking point. I'm not stepping back from my marriage, Jess, I said, my voice steady but firm. Your dad and I are partners. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to let you keep treating me like an outsider just because you don't like that he's moved on. Rick looked at me, then at Jess, and I could see he was torn. but he didn't say anything. He just sat there, letting the silence hang between us. Jess finally stood up, grabbed her bag, and said, "Well, I guess we're done here then." And just like that, she walked out. Rick and I sat there in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing what had just happened. It wasn't the resolution he'd been hoping for, but at least it was clear where we all stood. On the way home, Rick finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I didn't realize how much this was hurting you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. We both knew things were far from over, but at least for now, the lines had been drawn, and I was done backing down. Mom abandoned me for her new family, then tried to take my apartment. Hey everyone, I'm Alex, and I want to share a bit about my past. I grew up in this small, creaky house that always smelled of paint and turpentine. It wasn't fancy or anything, just cozy and filled with the kind of warmth you don't really find in a lot of places. My dad inherited his dad's art supply shop when I was just a kid, and even though the business wasn't huge, he put everything into it. And honestly, I loved it. After school, I'd help him restock the shelves, organize paintbrushes, and set up canvases. It was kind of our thing. Now, my mom, Stacy, she was different. She wasn't into the art stuff at all. She was a personal trainer, always out there in her workout clothes, super fit, and honestly, she made way more money than my dad ever did. She was the kind of person who liked to show off, always talking about her clients and their fancy lifestyles. It was like she never really fit into the life we had at home. She didn't care much for the art shop or the little things that made our place special. But hey, that was her. I remember this one night so clearly. I must have been around 13. I was in my room sketching in this old notebook my dad gave me when I heard her calling, "Alex, come help with dinner!" Her voice had that sharp edge to it, like she wasn't asking, more like ordering. I yelled back, "Coming!" and set my pencil down. By then, I was used to it. It was always like this, me stuck in the middle of their fights. I walked into the kitchen and started setting the table, and right on cue, it started. "Another slow week, Jack," Mom said, like she was dropping some kind of bomb. She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter, her expression sour. "When are you going to get your act together?" she added, and you could feel the tension in the air. Dad, who was flipping pancakes on the stove, just sighed. "Stacy, not in front of Alex," he mumbled, keeping his eyes on the pan, like if he stared hard enough, he could disappear into it. But she didn't back off. "She should know what a failure her father is," she shot back, her voice like ice. I froze for a second, my hand gripping the edge of the table. It was like this all the time, and I hated it. Mom always belittling Dad, and him just taking it, trying to keep the peace. I mean, I loved my dad. He was the one who was always there for me, always trying his best to make things work, even when things were rough. But it was like no matter what he did, it wasn't good enough for her. Mom didn't like our life. I could tell. She was always talking about her clients, the ones with the fancy cars and the huge houses. It was like she resented the small art shop and the house that smelled of paint and old wood. She used to complain about how she was stuck in a life she never wanted, and I guess she took it out on us. Mostly Dad, but sometimes me too. "Alex, where's my water?" she snapped, pulling me out of my thoughts. I scrambled to grab a glass and fill it, my hands shaking a little as I set it down in front of her. It wasn't fast enough for her liking, I guess, because she glared at me. "Useless," she muttered under her breath. "Can't even get a simple thing right." Dad tried to step in like he always did. "Stacy, it's just water. No harm done." But she wasn't having any of it. "You're too soft on her, Jack. No wonder she's growing up just as pathetic as you." I felt my face get hot. I wanted to say something, anything, but what was the point? If I argued, it would just get worse. I'd learned by then to just stay quiet, keep my head down, and get through it. So I did what I always did. I fled. I ran up to my room, slammed the door behind me, and just threw myself onto my bed, burying my face in the pillow. I remember laying there, feeling my heart race, trying to keep the tears in. It wasn't fair. Why did she have to be like this? And why did Dad put up with it? I knew he loved her. I mean, he must have. But it was like he was always trying to keep everything together when she clearly didn't care. And as much as I hated to admit it, I started feeling like maybe he was too soft. Maybe if he just stood up to her, things would be different. The thing is, I learned to stay out of her way as much as I could. I'd hide out in my room or go down to the shop with Dad when she wasn't around. If I could avoid her sharp comments or her judgmental stares, I did. It was easier that way. I got really good at being invisible, you know? Just staying out of the line of fire. The next morning was different, though. I woke up expecting the usual sounds. Dad in the kitchen making breakfast, the smell of coffee, the clatter of dishes. But it was silent. And not the peaceful kind of silence, more like the something's off kind. There was no smell of pancakes, no shuffling from the kitchen. I sat up, feeling a weird pit in my stomach. When I walked downstairs, it was like walking into a different house. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at this piece of paper in his hand. His face was pale, and he looked older than he had the day before. "Dad?" I said, my voice small. "Where's Mom?" He didn't answer right away. He just handed me the note, his hand shaking a little. I took it, already feeling that dread in my stomach grow. It was written in Mom's neat handwriting. Way too neat for what it said. "Jack, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving with Ryan. He can give me the life I deserve, not this small-town nonsense. Alex, don't bother trying to find me. You're just dead weight, and I don't need either of you holding me back." I stood there, staring at the paper, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. She was gone, just like that. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. And the way she said it, like we meant nothing, like we were just things she could discard. My throat tightened, and I shoved the note back at Dad, trying not to cry. He looked at me, his eyes tired and sad. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said, his voice cracking a little. "I know this is hard." I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to say? "It's fine," I managed to mumble, but it wasn't. It wasn't fine at all. She left us. She really left us. Dad tried to pull me into a hug, but I pulled away, heading back up to my room. I didn't want him to see how much it hurt. I didn't want him to feel guilty for something that wasn't his fault. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed, and it wasn't going back to normal anytime soon. After Mom left, things changed fast. I mean, it was like everything flipped upside down, and we had to figure out a whole new normal. I remember Dad sitting at the kitchen table for what felt like days, just staring at nothing. The art shop, the house, even me. I think it all felt like too much for him. And honestly, I didn't blame him. I felt the same way, like everything was heavier, like we were walking through mud or something. For a while, it was just survival mode. I was 13, and suddenly it was just me and Dad in this house that felt way too big now. I started taking on more around the house, not because Dad asked, but because I could tell he was struggling. He tried, you know? He'd wake up early, make breakfast, but it was half-hearted. Like, he'd burn the toast or forget to add sugar to the coffee. It was weird seeing him like that because he was always the one who had it together when I was growing up. He threw himself into work, and I mean, he really threw himself into it. The art shop became his whole world. If he wasn't at home, he was there, painting, organizing, or chatting with the few customers we still had. I think it was his way of coping, just burying himself in the one thing he had control over. It was tough for me too, but I tried to help where I could. After school, I'd head straight to the shop, do my homework at the counter, and restock the shelves. I even learned how to handle the register and started sketching again just to feel normal. But money was tight. Without Mom's income, we were basically scraping by. There were weeks when the shop barely made enough to cover bills, and I could see the stress eating at Dad. He tried to hide it, but I'd catch him checking the bank statements, rubbing his eyes like he was trying to erase the numbers. One day, a few months after she left, I came home from school, and he was sitting at the table with all these papers spread out. Bills, loan statements, all kinds of stuff. "Alex, sit down," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to talk." I sat, my stomach twisting. I knew things were bad, but hearing him actually say it made it real. "We're behind on the mortgage," he said, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. "If we don't start making more money soon, we could lose the house." It was a lot to process. I was just a kid, but even I knew that losing the house would be like losing everything. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and tried to act like I understood how serious it was. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked, and I meant it. I was scared, but I didn't want him to feel like he had to carry it all alone. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're already doing a lot, Alex. We'll figure it out." And we did try to figure it out. Dad started taking on extra projects, offering art classes at the shop on weekends. We put up flyers at the local schools and community centers, trying to get people interested. I'd help set up the tables, fill the cups with water for the brushes, and clean up after the kids left. Some days it felt like we were making progress. The shop would be buzzing with activity, and we'd have a little extra cash coming in. But other days, it felt like we were just treading water. The bills kept piling up, and there were nights when I'd hear Dad pacing in the living room, the floorboards creaking under his feet. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the sound. I hated feeling helpless. I wanted to fix things, to make it all go back to how it was before. But I couldn't. One afternoon, about a year later, Dad came home with some news that felt like a small win. He'd found a new supplier for art materials, and they were offering way cheaper prices. It meant we could expand our inventory and maybe attract more customers. This could be the break we need, he said. And for the first time in months, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. We spent that weekend reorganizing the shop, setting up new displays, and promoting the new stock. We even launched a small campaign on social media, posting pictures of the new supplies and offering discounts for the first week. I was learning a lot, not just about running a shop, but about the hustle that came with it. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to see some life back in the place. Things started picking up, slowly but surely. We got more regular customers, teachers, students, local artists, and the art classes became a hit. There was one day when I looked around the shop, and it was packed. People were browsing, kids were painting at the back tables, and Dad was in his element, chatting with everyone like he'd known them forever. It was the happiest I'd seen him since Mom left. For the next 2 years, we just kept building on that momentum. I was 15 by then, and the shop had become my second home. I knew the regulars by name, knew which brushes and paints they liked, and even started helping with the bookkeeping. Dad and I became a team, and in a weird way, I felt proud of what we were doing. It wasn't the life we'd had before, but it was something we built together. Then, just after my 15th birthday, everything changed again. Dad came home from the shop one night looking pale and shaken. I was in the kitchen making sandwiches when he walked in, his hands trembling as he pulled out a chair. "Alex, we need to talk." I put down the knife, my heart starting to race. "What's wrong?" I asked, the anxiety creeping back in. He took a deep breath, his eyes locked on the table. "Uncle Benny, he passed away." I was stunned. Uncle Benny was Dad's older brother, and even though we didn't see him often, he was still family. I remember him as this grumpy but kind guy who'd visit us a couple of times a year, always bringing some weird gadget or knick-knack he found on his travels. "What happened?" I managed to say, feeling a lump form in my throat. Dad shook his head. "Heart attack. It was sudden." He paused, then added, "He didn't have any other family, so everything's coming to us." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "He left us everything, his savings, his house, everything. Almost $150,000, Dad said, his voice a mix of shock and disbelief. "I don't know what to do with it." I didn't know either. We'd been struggling for so long that the idea of suddenly having that much money didn't feel real. It was like I couldn't process it. "What are we going to do?" I asked. And for the first time in a long time, I saw Dad smile, like he was seeing a way out of all the stress. "We're going to fix things, Alex," he said, his eyes lighting up. "This is our chance." And just like that, it felt like things might finally be turning around. A couple of years after Uncle Benny's inheritance helped us out, things really started to change for the better. Dad used a chunk of that money to expand the art shop. He upgraded the equipment, brought in more supplies, and even opened a second location in town. It was amazing to see how much things improved. We went from struggling to making a solid income, and the shop became a local favorite. I'd watch him, grinning ear to ear, as people came in, excited to buy supplies or sign up for his art classes. By the time I was 18, we were doing well enough that Dad surprised me with the biggest gift of my life, a small apartment near campus. "It's your graduation gift," he said, handing me the keys with a proud smile. "I don't want you worrying about dorm life or rent." I remember staring at him, completely speechless. It felt like all his hard work had paid off, and he was sharing that success with me. College was a whirlwind. I dove into my studies, focusing on business management so I could help Dad with the shops even more. We still made time for each other, dinners, quick calls, and whenever I came home for the weekend, I'd work at the shop. It was a routine that made everything feel stable and right. But then, just when it seemed like life couldn't get any better, it all came crashing down. I was in my final semester of college when I got a call from Dad. His voice sounded off, and it instantly put me on edge. "Alex, can you come home this weekend? I need to talk to you about something important." That pit in my stomach grew as I made the drive back. I had no idea what was going on, but I could tell it was serious. When I walked into the house, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His eyes were tired, his face pale. "It's cancer, Alex. Stage 4, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt the world tilt. I couldn't believe it. I refused to believe it. But no matter how much I tried to stay positive, the next year was the hardest of my life. Treatments, hospital visits, trying to juggle school and being there for him. It was a lot. I watched as he slowly got weaker, and it broke me inside. No matter how hard we fought, it wasn't enough. Dad passed away just before my college graduation. It felt like everything had been ripped away from me. The funeral was a blur of tears and people I barely knew telling me how sorry they were. All I could think about was how unfair it was that he worked so hard, only to be taken away like this. After he passed, I inherited the art shops, the house, and the apartment he'd given me. It felt overwhelming. I was just 22, and suddenly I was running a business and managing properties on my own. It was a lot to handle, and there were days when I felt like I was drowning. But I pushed through. I knew it was what he'd want. I kept the shops running and managed the apartments, trying to honor everything he'd built. Life slowly started to feel normal again. I settled into a routine: work, managing the rentals, and trying to take care of the shops like Dad had. It wasn't easy, but it gave me a sense of purpose. And just when I thought things were finally stabilizing, that's when she showed up. It had been a little over a year since Dad passed when I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before picking it up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Alex, it's me, Stacy," the voice said. I froze. My mom, the woman who left me and Dad when I was 13 and never looked back. "I'm back in town," she continued, her voice sounding way too casual for what she was saying. "I'd like to see you if you're willing." I was speechless. For years, I'd heard nothing from her. She abandoned us and didn't even try to reach out when Dad passed away. And now, out of nowhere, she wanted to talk. Part of me wanted to hang up right then and there. But another part, the part of me that remembered being a kid and wishing she'd come back, couldn't help but be curious. "All right," I said, my voice coming out a lot colder than I expected. "Where?" "Let's meet at Rosie's Cafe tomorrow at noon," she said, and hung up before I could say anything else. The next day, I got to the cafe early. I sat there, my leg bouncing up and down as I tried to keep my nerves in check. I told myself not to expect anything, that she was probably just back for something she needed. And when she finally walked in, it was like I'd been punched in the gut. She looked older, but she still had that same polished look, like she just came from some business meeting. But what shocked me the most was the kid trailing behind her. He looked about 16, just a couple of years younger than me when she left. My eyes narrowed as they walked over. What was she playing at? "Alex, you look great," she said, smiling like we were long-lost friends. "And this is Max, your brother." My brother? I stared at the kid, who gave me an awkward smile. She had a whole new family? While Dad and I were struggling to keep things together, she was out there building a new life. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Hi, Max," I said, my voice flat. We sat down and she started talking like nothing was wrong. She told me about how her relationship with her boyfriend Ryan had fallen apart when Max was little, how she moved from place to place, struggling to make ends meet. She said she came back to start fresh, and she hoped we could reconnect. I listened, but all I could think about was how she never reached out when Dad got sick, or even after he passed. She was acting like everything was fine, like the years in between didn't matter. And then she got to the real reason she came back. "I heard you have an apartment now," she said, giving me a hopeful look. "I was wondering if Max and I could stay there for a while. We don't have anywhere else to go, and it would really help us out." I felt my jaw tighten. She wanted me to help her after all these years? I glanced at Max. He looked uncomfortable, and I couldn't blame him. This whole situation was messed up. "I don't know, Mom," I said. "It's been a long time, and you never reached out. Not even when Dad was sick." She sighed, her face turning serious. "I know, and I'm sorry. But I'm trying to make things right now. We just need a place to stay until we get back on our feet. I promise it won't be long." I stared at her, trying to decide if she was being genuine or if this was just another one of her schemes. In the end, I looked at Max again. It wasn't his fault that she was like this, and I didn't want him to pay for her mistakes. "Fine," I said, "but only for a few months, and you have to pay for the utilities." Her face lit up like she'd just won something. "Thank you, Alex. We'll pay rent too once we get settled." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a huge mistake. As I walked out of the cafe, I knew things were about to get complicated. At first, things were all right. Mom and Mark moved into the apartment, and for a couple of weeks, it was quiet. I didn't hear much from them, and I figured they were settling in, trying to get back on their feet like they said they would. Honestly, I was trying to keep my distance. I didn't want to get too involved. I told myself it was the smart thing to do, keeping some space, you know. But then, things started to change. Little things, but enough for me to notice. Mom would text me out of nowhere, asking about money for groceries or complaining about how the water bill was higher than she expected. I reminded her, "Mom, you're only paying utilities, not rent." She'd always respond with something like, "I know, but it's still tough right now." I'd tell her I understood, but deep down, it bugged me. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. One afternoon, she called me while I was at work. "Alex, I need to talk to you." Her voice had that edge, the one I remembered from when I was younger, like she was about to ask for something big. I stepped outside and leaned against the building, already feeling the headache coming. What's up? Listen, Mark's school is asking for more fees than I thought, and he needs new books. It's just, things are really tight right now. She paused, like she was waiting for me to say something. When I didn't, she added, I was hoping you could help out, just this once. I felt my jaw tighten. Mom, I already gave you the apartment for free. You said you'd handle the utilities. And I appreciate that, I really do, she said, her voice smooth like she was trying to sell me something. But we're struggling. I'm doing everything I can. It's just a little more help, that's all. I stood there staring at the sidewalk. I could feel my frustration building up, but I tried to keep it cool. I'll think about it, I mumbled, and hung up before she could push any further. A few days later, I decided to drop by the apartment unannounced. I wanted to see how things were going, and honestly, I needed to get a read on the situation. I knocked on the door, and it took a while before Mark opened it. He looked surprised to see me, and there was this awkward pause before he stepped aside and let me in. The place was a mess. Boxes everywhere, dishes piled up in the sink, and clothes thrown over the couch. It was like they hadn't even tried to settle in properly. Mom came out of one of the bedrooms looking annoyed. Alex, you should have called first, she said, crossing her arms. I wanted to check in, I said, glancing around. What's going on here? She waved her hand like it was no big deal. Oh, we're just still unpacking. It's been busy. Her tone was casual, but I could tell she was irritated that I showed up without warning. Mom, it's been over a month. You said this was temporary, remember? I felt the frustration bubbling up again. You're still living here rent-free, and I haven't seen you paying for the utilities yet. She rolled her eyes. I know, Alex. We're working on it, okay? Things are just harder than I expected. I took a deep breath, trying not to lose it. It's not just about the bills, Mom. You need to get serious about moving on. I can't keep covering for you. She glared at me, and for a moment it felt like I was 13 again, standing in the kitchen while she tore into Dad. I gave up everything for you, she snapped. And this is how you repay me? By making me feel like a burden? I didn't even know what to say. I felt my hands clench into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not making you feel anything, Mom. I'm just telling you the truth. She huffed and walked back into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Mark was still standing there, looking uncomfortable. Sorry, man, he mumbled, staring at the floor. I shook my head. It's not your fault. I felt bad for him. He was stuck in the middle of all this, and it wasn't fair. But at the same time, I couldn't just let them walk all over me. After that, things got worse. Mom started spreading stories to the rest of the family, telling them I was being cold-hearted and stingy despite everything she'd done for me. I'd get calls from my aunt, my cousin, even some old family friends, all of them asking why I wasn't helping my mom. It was like she was rallying everyone against me, twisting the story to make herself look like the victim. One night, I got a call from my aunt. She launched into this whole speech about family loyalty and how I should be grateful for everything my mom sacrificed for me. I let her talk for a while, just listening and feeling my blood boil. Aunt Debbie, I finally said, cutting her off. You don't know the whole story. She abandoned us. She left me and Dad when I was a kid. I'm the one who's been picking up the pieces, not her. There was silence on the other end for a moment. That was a long time ago, Alex, she said softly. People change. You should give her another chance. I clenched my jaw, feeling the anger bubbling up. I've given her plenty of chances. She's the same person she's always been, manipulative and selfish. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. It was like no one remembered what really happened or they didn't care. And the more she talked, the more everyone seemed to turn against me. Even people I hadn't seen in years were suddenly reaching out, acting like they knew what was going on when they didn't have a clue. The final straw came when I saw a post on Facebook. Mom had written this long status about how I was refusing to support her and Mark, about how she was struggling to get back on her feet, and that I was heartless. The comments flooded in, all these people backing her up, saying things like, how could she do that to her own mother? And family comes first, no matter what. I felt my stomach drop as I read the comments. These people had no idea what really happened, but they were quick to judge. It felt like everyone was against me, and there was nothing I could do to change their minds. Later that week, I got an email about unpaid utilities. She hadn't paid a single bill since she moved in. I was done. I grabbed my phone and called her. Mom, we need to talk about the bills. You agreed to pay for the utilities, and you haven't paid anything. She sighed loudly like I was being unreasonable. Oh, Alex, come on. You've got plenty of money from the shop. Can't you just cover it? I felt my grip tighten on the phone. That's not the point, and you know it. We had an agreement. Agreements change. she said, like it was no big deal. You should be helping your family, not keeping score. I couldn't take it anymore. I've helped you enough. You need to figure things out, or you're going to have to leave. She laughed, this bitter, humorless laugh. Go ahead and try, Alex. See how far that gets you. I hung up, my hands shaking. I knew then that I'd have to take things further. She wasn't going to leave on her own, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. It was time to do something about it. After that call with Mom, I knew I couldn't let things go on the way they were. It was clear she wasn't going to change, and if I kept letting her stay, I'd just be giving her more opportunities to mess things up for me. I spent the next few days researching my options, trying to figure out how to evict her legally. I was done with her games, and I was done letting her walk all over me. I booked an appointment with a lawyer. When I walked into his office, I felt this mix of nerves and relief. I'd never done anything like this before, and it felt weird, like I was betraying my own family. But at the same time, I knew I didn't have a choice. I couldn't keep letting her make me the bad guy while she took advantage of everything I'd worked for. The lawyer, Mr. Johnson, was a straightforward kind of guy. I told him the whole story, and he didn't seem surprised at all. You've got every right to evict her, he said, flipping through the notes he took, especially since she's not paying rent and has no formal lease agreement. She's considered a guest at this point. I felt a small weight lift off my shoulders. So, what do I need to do? I asked, leaning forward. He handed me a form. This is the eviction notice. You give her this, and she has 30 days to vacate the apartment. If she doesn't leave, we'll go through the court system to get her out. It sounded simple enough, but I knew it wouldn't be. Mom wasn't the type to just pack up and leave because someone told her to. Still, it was a start, and it was more than I'd had before. That weekend, I drove over to the apartment with the notice in hand. I tried to keep my nerves in check, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. Either she'd accept it and go quietly, or things were about to get even messier. When I knocked on the door, Mark answered again. Hey, Alex, he said, his face all cautious. What's up? Is Mom home? I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. He nodded and stepped aside. I walked in, and there she was, sitting on the couch like she didn't have a care in the world. When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow. Oh, it's you. What, no heads up again? I ignored her comment and pulled out the eviction notice. We need to talk. Her eyes narrowed. What's that? It's an eviction notice, I said, holding it out to her. You have 30 days to move out. The room went silent. For a second, I thought she might actually take it, but then she scoffed, crossing her arms. You're kicking your own mother out? After everything I've done for you? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. You haven't paid the bills, you've lied to everyone about me, and you've made no effort to get back on your feet like you promised. I can't keep supporting you like this. She glared at me, her face twisting in anger. This is how you repay me? By throwing me and Mark out on the street? It's not my job to support you, Mom, I said, feeling the frustration build up. You made your choices. Now you need to deal with them. She stood up, and I could see the fury in her eyes. You think you're so high and mighty now, don't you? Just because you have a little money and some property, you think you're better than us. I shook my head. This isn't about that. This is about you taking advantage of me. She snatched the paper from my hand, crumpling it up. Fine, she snapped, but don't think this is over. You'll regret this, Alex. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out, my hands shaking as I reached for the door. As I left, I caught Mark's eye. He looked so uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I felt bad for him, but there was nothing I could do. This wasn't his fight. It was between me and her. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Mom doubled down, going around telling anyone who would listen that I was kicking her out on the street and abandoning my family. She made it sound like I was some heartless monster who didn't care about anyone but myself. It hurt seeing the comments and the messages from people who believed her, but I tried to push it out of my mind. I knew the truth, and I had to stay focused. With the eviction notice served, I started getting updates from Mr. Johnson about the next steps. It was a waiting game now, just counting down the days. But then, the phone calls started. Every couple of days, Mom would call, either begging me to reconsider or angrily accusing me of turning my back on her. One day, she left a voicemail that said, "If you think you can just get rid of me, you've got another thing coming. You don't know what I'm capable of." I deleted the message, but the threat hung in my mind. I didn't know if she was serious or just trying to scare me, but it worked. I felt on edge, like something bad was around the corner. 2 weeks in, I got a call from Mr. Johnson again. Alex, she's trying to fight the eviction, he said. She's claiming you promised her the apartment and that she's entitled to stay. I felt my stomach drop. Can she do that? It's unlikely she'll win, he said, trying to sound reassuring. But it means we'll have to go to court. Great, I thought. Just what I needed. More drama. But I knew I couldn't back down now. If I let her stay, she'd never leave, and things would only get worse. I agreed to move forward with the court process, even though the thought of facing her in court made my head spin. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I felt like my insides were twisting into knots as I walked into the courtroom. Mom and Mark were already there. She looked upset, all red-eyed and teary, like she was trying to play the victim. Mark just looked miserable, and I felt bad for him, but I had to remind myself that this wasn't about him. The hearing wasn't long, but it felt like hours. Mom put on this whole act about how she was struggling, how she was just trying to reconnect with her family and build a life for her and Mark. She even cried a few times, and I could see some people in the courtroom giving her sympathetic looks. But then it was my turn. My lawyer laid out the facts. How she hadn't paid anything, how she'd agreed to the terms, and how she'd been spreading lies about me to family and friends. I watched as the judge's expression went from neutral to annoyed. He wasn't buying her act. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Mom was ordered to leave the apartment within the next 2 weeks, and if she didn't, she'd face legal consequences. I felt a rush of relief, but also a heaviness. I'd won, but it didn't feel like a victory. As we left the courtroom, I caught up with Mark. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry it came to this. He looked up at me, his eyes sad. I know. I'm sorry too. He paused, then added, I wish things were different. Me too, I said. If you ever need anything, you know how to reach me. He nodded, and we parted ways. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight lift a little. It wasn't over, but it was a step in the right direction. Maybe now I could finally start to move on.
Walking into Elite Couture, Tasha felt the weight of countless eyes following her every move. As a senior White House advisor, she'd grown accustomed to scrutiny, but something about this upscale boutique made her shoulders tense. Her fingers brushed against silk and chiffon as she searched for the perfect dress for next week's diplomatic summit. The security guard's gaze burned into her back. Bradley, his name tag declared, hadn't stopped watching since she'd entered. Even as other customers breezed through the aisles unbothered, his attention remained fixed, his judgment clear in every lingering look. Here at New Real Life Stories, we uncover moments when prejudice collides with power, and today's tale reveals how a simple shopping trip transformed into a confrontation that would shake a city's fashion establishment to its core. As Tasha stepped into the fitting room, neither she nor Bradley could have predicted how the next 10 minutes would dramatically alter both their lives forever. Tasha glided between the racks of designer gowns, her fingertips trailing across beaded silk and smooth velvet. Each piece she selected represented more than just fabric, they were armor for the diplomatic battles ahead. A lifetime of breaking barriers had taught her the importance of presentation, yet with every careful choice, Bradley's presence loomed larger, his footsteps echoing her own like an unwanted shadow. The emerald silk would suit you perfectly, a sales associate offered warmly, holding up a stunning gown that caught the afternoon light. But Bradley's scowl cut through the moment, his radio crackling unnecessarily loud in the hushed boutique. The associate's smile faltered, her eyes darting between them before she quietly retreated. Tasha squared her shoulders, refusing to let his surveillance diminish her dignity. She'd navigated countless high-stakes negotiations, she wouldn't let this man's prejudice derail her afternoon. The fitting room mirror reflected more than her image, it captured the weight of expectations she'd carried throughout her career. Every promotion, every achievement had come with scrutiny that her white colleagues never faced. As she slipped into a midnight blue sheath dress, voices drifted through the curtain. Watch that one carefully, Bradley muttered to another guard. Something's not right about her. Been here too long, looking at the expensive stuff. Tasha's hands trembled as she buttoned the dress, but her resolve hardened. The familiar heat of indignation rose in her chest, she'd faced discrimination before, turned it into fuel for change. The bathroom mirror would have to do for this final fitting. She gathered her selections, including a cream blouse she'd been admiring, and made her way across the store. Yet even this simple decision sparked Bradley's suspicion. "Ma'am, stop right there." His command cut through the store's ambient music like a knife. Other shoppers froze, their expressions a familiar mix of discomfort and feigned ignorance. Some quickly busied themselves with their phones, while others simply turned away. "I need to check your belongings. Store policy for suspicious behavior." "On what grounds?" Tasha's voice remained steady, years of diplomatic training evident in her controlled response. She'd learned early in her career that displaying anger would only reinforce their prejudices. "I'm simply shopping, like everyone else here." Bradley's face tightened, his jaw clenching at her composed defiance. "We've been watching you. Taking items into the bathroom isn't normal shopping behavior." His hand moved toward her arm, but Tasha stepped back, maintaining the invisible barrier between them. "Don't touch me," she warned, her tone carrying the authority of countless White House briefings. "Your assumptions about what constitutes normal behavior are exactly the problem here." But Bradley's next move shattered all pretense of professionalism. His fingers gripped her blazer, attempting to forcibly remove it. "Standard procedure," he growled, but his actions screamed of something far more sinister. The expensive fabric strained under his grip as Tasha stood her ground, her heart pounding but her exterior remaining calm. "Remove your hands immediately," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. Other customers finally began to murmur, phones recording the escalating scene. A young woman stepped forward, then hesitated, caught between the desire to help and the fear of involvement. The store manager emerged from his office, his face draining of color as he assessed the situation. "Bradley, what are you doing?" His intervention came too late, the damage was done. But Tasha wasn't finished. She reached for her phone, her hands steady now. The text from her assistant confirmed what she already knew, her Secret Service detail waited outside. The boutique's doors swung open, revealing a team of agents in impeccable suits. The sharp clicks of their shoes against the marble floor echoed through the now silent store. Bradley's face contorted as realization dawned, he'd just attempted to strip search a senior White House official. The manager stammered apologies, but Tasha raised her hand for silence. "This isn't about me," she declared, her voice carrying across the hushed space. "This is about every person who's been profiled, humiliated, and denied their dignity in spaces like this. Every woman who's been made to feel she doesn't belong, every shopper who's been followed, every customer who's had their presence questioned. Change doesn't come from above, it comes from moments like these, when we refuse to let prejudice go unchallenged." The story spread like wildfire across social media. Elite Couture's corporate office launched an immediate investigation, uncovering a pattern of discriminatory behavior that extended beyond Bradley. Security footage revealed selective enforcement, with minority customers receiving disproportionate scrutiny. Bradley's termination came swiftly, but Tasha ensured it wasn't the end. She leveraged her position to push for mandatory bias training across the retail industry, working with civil rights organizations to develop comprehensive guidelines for security personnel. The incident became a case study in retail discrimination, discussed in boardrooms and training sessions nationwide. What began as one woman's humiliation transformed into a movement for systemic change. In the weeks that followed, Tasha returned to the boutique. Different security guards nodded respectfully as she entered, their training evident in their professional demeanor. The emerald silk dress still hung on display, but now it represented something more, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statements come not from the clothes we wear, but from the dignity with which we wear them. As she browsed the racks, a young black woman approached her, speaking softly. "I saw the video," she whispered. "Thank you for standing up. It happens so often, but no one ever believes us." Tasha squeezed her hand, remembering every slight, every suspicious glance, every moment of wrongful accusation she'd experienced throughout her life. "Change happens one moment at a time," Tasha replied, her voice firm with conviction. "We just have to be brave enough to seize those moments when they come." 6 months after that fateful afternoon at Elite Couture, Tasha stood at a podium, addressing retail executives from across the nation. The emerald silk dress she wore, yes, that same dress, sparkled under the conference lights as she shared her story. But this time, she wasn't just speaking about one incident. She was championing a new era of inclusive shopping experiences, with over 50 major retailers adopting her proposed training programs. As she left the stage, a young security officer approached her. "Your experience changed how I do my job," she admitted. "Now I question my assumptions before I question our customers." That's the power of standing up for what's right. It creates ripples that touch countless lives. One person's courage can transform an entire industry, turning moments of injustice into catalysts for change. If this story moved you, help us reach more hearts and minds. Join our Real Life Stories new family on the journey to 10,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment telling us about a time you stood up for what's right. Together, we're not just sharing stories, we're changing lives, one video at a time.